Story 1. When I was a kid, we had a brutal drought that lasted about 3 weeks. It dried up our well and all the creeks and drastically lowered the river. It was so dry that we had to order water delivered in large tanks so we and our livestock could drink. Desperate wildlife came down from the mountain to drink from the livestock troughs. We couldn't waste precious water on bathing, so it was miserable. We didn't have air conditioning either, so it was hot and uncomfortable. The day it finally rained, we all ran outside and bathed immediately. I never forgot that experience, and I still fear running out of water for bathing, so I keep many dry bathing options like wipes, dry shampoo, and waterless soap, just in case. Story 2. 30 days. Upon deployment, $100 each. Last man standing wins. Story 3. I spent 11 days in a brutal depressive episode in college. My roommate finally kicked down the door thinking I was dead. But I was not. I was just playing RuneScape and had achieved maximum goblin mode. He dragged me to the dorm showers like a Victorian child with cholera. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. 0 out of 10 smelled amazing after. Story 4. I am currently about 5 weeks homeless. Shower facilities are few and far between. Story 5. I think more than a month but less than 2 months. Right now I am ending a year-long vacation. There is no need to go out. Depression and boredom can make days and weeks blend together. My savings are getting low, so I decided to go back to work. On December 1st, I start a new job that I am looking forward to. Story 6. It was probably close to 8,000 miles. I left Sydney after showering at my buddy's apartment and took a long, soothing bath when I landed in Seattle. Story 7. 2 weeks volunteering at a private game reserve in Africa. Story 8. It's been almost a year. That's not as bad as it sounds. On December 26, 2024, I tore a quadriceps tendon. I'm still not walking, which means I can't step in and out of the shower. For the past year, I have bathed with post-surgical bathing wipes, and my wife washes my hair. In an ironic twist, 2 years earlier, we had the tub removed to install a walk-in shower. The installers asked whether we wanted grab bars, and we both said we did not need them. If we had installed those grab bars, I could get in and out with no problem. Story 9. For a year, I had severe depression. I used wet wipes and deodorant, but the air was thick with my odor. Story 10. Bathing or showering? I haven't bathed for years, but I shower every day. I don't want to stew in my own filth. Story 11. I used to go backpacking for 2 weeks every month. There were no showers in the backcountry. In the summer, you could swim in a lake or river, but in the winter, you were completely out of luck. In Algonquin, you only get about 3 to 4 months of comfortable water temperature a year. Story 12. There was no power 5 years ago, and I could not shower for 6 days. Story 13. I'm a Vietnam veteran, so I'd say around 2 weeks. Maybe a little more or less. Story 14, maybe 2 weeks. Before anyone judges, please keep in mind that people have different reasons for not bathing. Some people do not have access to running water. Others have access but struggle with mental health, are disabled, or have other reasons. Story 15. There was only one shower in the house, and I redid the plumbing for the entire house. The first bathtub arrived incorrectly, and the second one was damaged. By the time I was finally able to shower, it had been over 3 weeks. I washed with soap and water at the sink, but it was not the same. I worked remotely. That was the only way it was possible. Honestly, without outside judgment, I really do not think it was that bad. Story 16. Showering. Probably no more than every 4 days. Baths, once a year at most. Story 17. When I was depressed, it lasted quite some time. I don't even want to think about how long it may have been. Story 18. It depends. About a week for a full shower, a couple of weeks for my hair, and several months for a shave. I had severe postpartum depression and I took care of my kids but not myself. When I became very pregnant, I could not see my legs to shave, so I skipped it. I am doing better now, but life is still difficult. Story 19. Probably a week or 2. I live alone and was depressed during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Story 20. It was a little under 3 weeks, I think. It was a Hohenfels rotation. I was a staff officer at the time, so I was not sweating my ass off or anything. Story 21. An actual bath? Couldn't tell you. I have an adult son with cerebral palsy. I remodeled the master bathroom to include a large walk-in shower to accommodate him and removed the tub. I'm not sure when the spare bathroom was last used. I should check on that. The last time I was in there was a dead gecko in the toilet. Too much information? Story 22. It lasted about 20 days. I had just given birth, and my baby had many health issues. He did not sleep well, and neither did I. I had no one to help me, and I was dealing with postpartum depression. Story 23. As a severely depressed male college student during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic, I spent an entire summer quarantined in New York City. My mindset was that no one would notice me and that I did not want to get out of bed. It was a dark time. Story 24. It was never a goal, but I was in the hospital for several weeks after a bad car accident. I still had glass fragments in my neck, hair, and hand, and I could not wait for someone to clear me for a shower. My skin and hair were matted with dried blood, glass fragments, and antiseptic. It was the best shower I ever had, even though I had to sit for it. Story 25. For 24 days, I was on a United Nations mission in Haiti. The potable water in the trailer was for drinking only, and the local water was for showers. I would not recommend showering with it or letting it touch your body. Smelled bad and looked like urine. I used a bottle of water to wash my genitals and armpits. When I returned to Rosie Roads, I showered for 2 hours. My battle dress uniforms were stiff enough to stand by themselves. Story 26. 2 weeks of field exercise in the summer. I am sure we smelled anything but pleasant. The uniform I wore every day smelled so rank I nearly tossed it. Fun times, not for me. Story 27. EW. What on earth? I knew a girl from Kolkata who would only wash her hands and face. She did not shower regularly because she believed that if the body was clothed, it could not get dirty. Story 28. I have not taken a bath in years. I do shower. The longest I have gone without showering is 4 days. Story 29. I'm allergic to water. I break out in intense hives that go away 1 to 2 hours after I shower. Sometimes it gets really bad and I go into mild anaphylaxis. Every time I bathe, it feels like I've just run a marathon. And if I do it right before work, that means coming home and passing out from sheer exhaustion. I went through a very busy period where I literally didn't have time to shower without falling into serious sleep debt. I went about a month and a half without showering. I used dry shampoo, baby wipes, and everything I could to stay presentable. My partner jokes that I'm incapable of giving off an unpleasant odor because even then I truly didn't stink. I'm sure my efforts helped. Nowadays I shower once a week and use dry shampoo and baby wipes in between. Nobody in my personal life has ever mentioned any smell issues. In fact, I regularly get compliments about how I always smell so nice. I am certain I overcompensate, but I use fragrances from the kind of little hippie shops that most people have nostalgic ties to. Story 30. 4 to 5 weeks is a record for me. I did not bathe or shower during that time. I do not like showering, and I have a genetic tendency to start smelling odd only after 3 to 4 weeks. However, that was when I lived alone. When I was with my girlfriend, showering every day or every other day was my standard. Story 31. I was at camp for about 2 weeks without access to showers, and I became desperate enough to wash my hair in a bucket. Story 32. I think I once went 3 days during the pandemic when I was extremely depressed and anxious because I had no job and there was nothing to do. Story 33. I remember my grandfather saying that during the war he went 6 months without bathing. Story 34. I just took 3 days off because of surgery on my shoulder. Last night, bathing and actually lifting my arm to put on deodorant felt so good. Story 35. Nearly 30 days at the National Training Center in the Mojave Desert made me wish for a nuclear winter. Story 36. My bathtub became inoperable about 8 years ago. I still shower daily but cannot use it. Story 37. Define bathing. Military personnel here are going to hold records if you're talking about a full-on bath or shower. Story 38. Bathing, probably about 2 years. Showering, I'd say 3 or 4 days tops. That's because I was on maternity leave and barely paid any attention to myself. Story 39. It lasted a little over a week during a severe depressive episode. I only managed to shower by bringing my phone into the shower to watch something because I was in deep brain rot. Story 40. 4 days on a fishing trip in the mountains. The campsite shower was way too cold for me. I laughed out loud. Story 41. After about 12 days, I had mushrooms growing on parts of my skin. Since then, I never go longer than 3 days without showering or changing my underwear. I also enjoy seeing myself naked. Story 42. 30 hours because I was traveling. I cannot function without bathing twice a day. Story 43. I stayed about a week in the hospital. I was too sick to care. Otherwise, 3 days is my limit. Story 44. As an adult, 48 hours. I shower once a day religiously. I cannot stand the feeling of being dirty. Harold Homer. Story 45. I was in 6th grade when we were forced to spend a week at a nature camp. We stayed in small cabins with bunks like those in a barracks, and I shared a cabin with several boys who bullied me regularly. I was not going to risk them trying anything. Story 46. A bit over a month ago, I had almost died because my intestines ruptured. I was in the hospital, buzzing on Dilaudid, taking naps and watching SpongeBob and Ghost Hunters. Story 47. About 2 weeks ago, when I was extremely sick with an upper respiratory infection, I finally felt well enough to play the video game Snowboard Supercross on the PlayStation 2. As I sat there, I realized I should shower because I could smell myself. Gross. Story 48. Maybe a week. I was so sick at that time I could barely get out of bed. Story 49. About 30 days. Sitting at a mountaintop outpost with weekly deliveries of bottled water will do that. Luckily, we all smelled the same. Wet wipes to clean the armpits and other areas go a long way. Story 50. It was a few weeks, probably. I was sitting at home all day, so I didn't really see the point of showering. Story 51. I spent a week being the sickest I have ever been in my life, and another week in the intensive care unit at the hospital, where they were trying to make sure I did not literally die. After about a week, they wheeled me into a shower big enough for a wheelchair, nurses, and the patient. They lifted me out of the wheelchair and into a chair attached to the floor, helped me shower and put on a different hospital gown. Then they put me back in the wheelchair and took me back to my hospital room because I was completely done for the day. Story 52. I showered the evening before I was admitted to the hospital for induction and could not shower again until I was released 2 days later. Story 53. About 10 days of a depressive episode caused by being cooped up during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. Story 54. I have gone away for between 5 and 7 days a few times in my life, not for any other reason than that I had nowhere to be or because I was seriously ill. Story 55. Maybe 5 days while on a camping trip. My stepfather said it has been over a year. It is disgusting. Story 56. I spent 2 weeks in the wilderness. The water was too cold to get into, and it smelled unpleasant. Story 57. About a week after my anterior cruciate ligament surgery, I could not move. Story 58. It lasted about a week. I had the worst flu of my life, and for the first few days I was too weak to do anything but sleep. The first shower exhausted me, but I felt much better being clean again. Story 59. I spent a week canoeing on the Great Lakes with the Scouts. Story 60. Like in a formal shower? It has been months. Deployments are not fun. Story 61. I hiked the Georgia section of the Appalachian Trail for 5 days. Story 62. When a proper shower or bath is unavailable, such as when camping, I take a sponge bath, even in a gas station restroom on a long road trip. Story 63. I got lost on a trek in the mountains for 16 days and nights. I survived because my backpack contained compressed chicken bits. I think I ate around 6 kilograms of chicken during that time, with only salt rubbed on it and roasted over the fire, and I miraculously gained weight too. Don't judge me. I was able to find a river and a tin sheet to cover myself. Story 64. I went on a 5-day camping trip with my brother. It turned unseasonably cold and started snowing. So my plan of taking a daily dip in the nearby river went out the window. The ride home in his truck smelled like a mix of campfire smoke and body odor. Story 65. I used to do long hikes lasting 3 to 4 weeks. I carried Dr. Bronner peppermint soap because it was environmentally safe. I would find a suitable stream or river to bathe in only every couple of days, sometimes every 4 to 5 days. I washed my hands and face at least a couple of times each day, but a full body wash could be much less frequent. When I did wash, it was a very quick, chilly rinse. In civilization, at most a day. Story 66. Ask any grunt who served in Vietnam. They will not remember the number of days. There were no calendars, and clothes were known to rot away. A basic hygiene ritual was to pour a little water into a steel helmet and take a horse bath. Story 67. I was in the field with the army, serving in the swamps of Louisiana for 18 days straight and did not shower during that time. We worked tirelessly with very little sleep, marching through the woods all night and conducting consecutive assaults on 3 villages and similar missions. I had only 2 extra pairs of underwear and socks for the entire period. There were no toilets, only a shovel. Story 68. About a week after surgery, I think, I was not allowed to get wet or raise my arms above my head. Story 69. I do not fit comfortably in traditional bathtubs because I am very tall, so I have not used one for at least 30 years. I shower regularly, especially after I raised my shower head by about a foot. Story 70. The fact that so many people do not understand the difference between bath and bathe shows that American public schools are failing us badly. Shaking my head. Story 71. For 2 months, depression, eczema, severe bullying at school, and suicidal ideation took over. It took a long time before I could wash without stinging from that flare-up. I used wipes to clean my intimate areas and underarms, but I physically could not shower. Story 72. I think it lasted over a week. It was chaotic, and I had to walk to and from work and handle other errands. It was close to being homeless. I remember eating nothing but ketchup from the fridge because I was so poor. That was the worst thing I experienced. Story 73. Bathing specifically? It's been well over a decade. I take a normal shower about every 3 or 4 days. Story 74. I do not know exactly, but it lasted for several months during my childhood. I was the smelly kid at school. My mother never made me bathe, did not do my laundry, and did not hold me accountable. If I forgot or chose to play outside after school instead of doing my laundry, I had to wear dirty clothes. I was responsible for my own laundry from the age of 8. Childhood neglect builds character. Story 75. A month and a half. Thank goodness I wasn't in a hot climate area. That would have been brutal to deal with. I would have withdrawn from society, laughing out loud. Story 76. 20 years, something like that. I shower every other day. Story 77. I have severe depression. When it was at its worst, I was in high school and went almost an entire summer without bathing. Story 78. Bathing in particular about 4 to 5 years. Story 79. 9 days during the first lockdowns for coronavirus disease 2019 in March 2020. It was still rather cold where I lived, and I did nothing all day. Story 80. Months passed unless you count the rubbing alcohol I applied to my most odorous areas. Being homeless and horribly ill can mean not being able to reach a bathroom of any kind, much less a facility for showering. When I was doing a bit better while homeless, I would go to a public pool to shower, depending on the area and what I could access. Not every beach has a shower, and when that was all I had, I hated it, but it was better than sink showers. Sink showers were better than using rubbing alcohol that burned away the odor. Now that I have been rendered a paraplegic by street violence, it has been a long time since I had a proper bath. Cold water bottles are better than nothing because I cannot tolerate the alcohol baths anymore. I am not in my early 20s anymore. Story 81. We camped at the Coachella Festival for 3 days, and the shower lines were hours long. I did a bird bath using baby wipes and wore deodorant. Story 82. 28 days at sea on a small sailboat crossing the Atlantic. Story 83. I was in a medically induced coma for more than 6 weeks after my liver and kidneys began to fail due to alcohol abuse. Story 84. 2.5 weeks after a bad car accident, they finally took me to the burn unit on a stretcher to be hosed down. To this day, it is the best feeling I can remember. Story 85. For 2 weeks I was in the Peace Corps without access to hot running water or a room insulated well enough to bathe in. Story 86. I was in Iraq for the initial invasion in 2003, probably 6 weeks or so. Story 87. A little over 2 weeks after an ice storm passed through western Kentucky and caused a prolonged power outage, I developed a severe case of jock itch. During that time, I took very quick showers with freezing water. It was rough. Story 88. 23 days, bored Marines, a promise of Domino's Pizza, and $100 on Camp Wilson. The senior non-commissioned officers shut down the Good Shower trailer for senior non-commissioned officers only, and I didn't want to walk all the way to the other side of camp to shower. In protest, and because of a bet by my fellow Lance Corporal, I simply did not shower. I was forced to shower when a master sergeant caught wind of me and chewed me out for being unsatisfactory and fucking disgusting. I got pizza and $50 because I already owed the guy that amount. Oh well. Story 89. This thread confirms the worst fears of people who are hesitant to use public transit. Story 90. 7 days at a festival, combined with 6 days of obstipation and trench foot caused by my boot breaking on the last day with no way to get it off. The shower did wonders, but nothing felt better than the turdquake. Story 91. I spent a month backpacking, then took a shower at a random young men's Christian association. Over the next 2 weeks, I took a few more showers and finally did laundry. Showering did not even matter at that point because my sleeping bag smelled like someone had died in it. Story 92. We have to wait until the water warms up at the creek. Story 93. I usually shower every day. I skip a day maybe once every couple of weeks. I skip 2 days maybe once a month if I am feeling extra down. I have gone 3 days a few times in my adult life, but never more than that. I cannot hope to get decent sleep if I am dirty and sticky. Story 94. 10 days working in the Fish Lake and Death Valley wilderness areas. Salt and dirt simply washed off. Story 95. This is a depressing story. I had a friend who died a few years ago, leaving 3 young children in the care of a neglectful mother. My friend told me that the children had only had a Florida shower all summer. They would swim in a pool and merely dry off afterward. Their mother had not washed or bathed them for the entire summer. Story 96. I think it lasted 4 days. I was studying abroad and we went on a class trip to Scotland. I assumed the hostels would provide towels. They did not. I had fresh clothes every day, plus deodorant and a hat, and I washed my face, but it was not something I would like to experience again. The closest I came to that recently was a trip to Brussels where the bed and breakfast also did not have towels. I used one of the spare sheets to dry off and let it air dry while I was out exploring. Fortunately, the bed and breakfasts at my next 2 stops did have towels. Story 97. Why don't people get a rash from the cheese at the end of their sausage? Story 98. I would say this, but I was severely depressed and I am embarrassed. Story 99. I spent around 2 months without a proper shower after Hurricane Katrina. Story 100. 3 weeks without a proper shower. I was backpacking in a fairly remote area of Arizona. I would freshen up with a baby wipe and a water bottle, but at a certain point you will smell the same either way. Story 101. Somewhere between 3 weeks and a month, I lost track of time and, for a while, my grip on reality after long-standing, untreated severe depression and out-of-control substance abuse combined with the profound grief of losing my best friend and first boyfriend in an accident, and then, shortly after, losing my cousin to a brutal stabbing. I think it may have been psychosis, but I am not entirely sure. Now I always go out of my way to be extra kind to people who seem smelly. You never know the ugly kind of hell people are being dragged through. Story 102. For 3 days I was so dehydrated that I could not get up from a crawling position. Story 103. I spent 2 weeks in the field when I was in the army. Shaving out of a cup and baby wipes were all we had. Story 104. I spent 10 days without power or road access during a natural disaster. I would not recommend it. Story 105. Maybe a week when depressed. Showering can feel like a lot of work when you are depressed, but it is important and you will often feel much better afterward. Story 106. I spent 6 weeks living in my car. My first couple of paychecks went to paying bills, and then I bought a gym membership to use the shower. Story 107. A week on a job with only baby wipes. No showers because of poison oak. Story 108. I don't remember the exact number of days, but it was definitely over 30 while I was in Afghanistan. Story 109. When I was 14 and playing World of Warcraft, it lasted about 5 to 8 days. Story 110. For 8 months, when I had a chest catheter for dialysis, I could not get it wet. I lived on baby wipes and bird baths, and I hated every second. Story 111. The longest I went was about 12 days, but to be fair, I wasn't going outside or doing anything exhausting, so it was no sweat. I don't mean a slight smell. It was full on. Like someone had dumped a trash can of rotten seafood on the floor when I walked into a room. Story 112. When I was undergoing cancer treatment, I did not shower for about 2 weeks on one occasion. I had a hysterectomy and did not want to climb the stairs to the shower because I could barely sit up. Story 113. About a week after breaking my leg, I was stuck on the couch and unpleasant to be around. I was also suffering from the gastrointestinal side effects of taking hydrocodone and acetaminophen around the clock. My flatulence was visible, colored, and lingered in the air. Story 114. The worst was about a week when I was particularly depressed. Story 115. About 2 weeks after a motorcycle accident, Soapy felt a slight sting when water touched live skin. Story 116. It was probably a little over a week. I was newly postpartum and really struggling. Story 117. I was sick and slept for 2 days straight. Story 118. I do not remember specifically, but I believe it has been around 4 days. I have chronic health issues, and sometimes bathing can be difficult. Story 119. I took it hard when my mother passed unexpectedly. I drank heavily, got into fights every other day, and did not brush my teeth or bathe for 3 weeks. Story 120. As an adult, 4 or 5 days. As a child, God only knows. I was raised by a single, depressed father. Story 121. When I was growing up, I probably smelled bad. Story 122. 2 to 3 days. I was at home doing nothing, so I did not smell much. I make sure to wash my face. I do not bathe regularly, but I shower, so I interpreted the question as asking how often I wash myself. Story 123. 2 weeks on a river rafting trip. You wash in the river as best you can, but it is not bathing. It is fine because everyone else on the trip stinks too. Story 124. It lasted longer than anyone here, about 8 to 14 months. My depression was at an all-time high. I did little more than get out of bed. Story 125. 2 weeks after I gave birth, I used every free minute I had to sleep. I was sponge bathing and using a bottle to clean my intimate area. Whenever I had time for a full shower, I went to bed instead. Story 126. I spent the better part of 6 months taking sponge baths. It was a long time before I had a real shower. Story 127. A week after a major hip surgery, relearning to walk was very painful, so I used washcloths for showers. Story 128. Quite a few years ago, while heavily medicated and living in unbearable, seemingly inescapable conditions, severely depressed and sporadically yet actively suicidal, I went about 2 months without showering. I have been showering every day for at least a few years now. I am clearly in a better headspace. Story 129. It was about 10 days into a camping trip. When we returned, it was a race for the shower. Story 130. I hiked the Appalachian Trail. This question has no meaning. I have things that still smell 3 years later. Story 131. Back when I was a neglected shut-in child, I didn't go to school after the 3rd grade. We lived in condemned houses. Half the time the pipes were broken, frozen, or both. It was so frigid in the house that any wetness would sting. Those were not fun times. Story 132. At my worst, it would be 3 days before I forced myself to shower. Story 133. About a week, and I also went swimming every day. Does that count? Story 134. Define bathing. I cannot remember the longest time without taking an actual shower, because the days all blurred together after a while. It was more than a month. While in the field during the Gulf War, we went weeks at a time without a proper shower. We scrubbed down daily with baby wipes, washcloths, soap, and as little water as possible. I would hit the face and neck first, then armpits, crotch, and buttocks in that order. I always did my feet separately because they sweat a lot. A few guys had camping showers that a friend or family member sent them. It is basically a black plastic bag that holds 3 or 4 gallons of water. It has a small hose with a clamp and nozzle. They work okay. I used them a few times camping, but not when I was in the Marines. About once a week or two, we got to pour some water from a 5-gallon jerry can or some water bottles over us. You would get wet, scrub down, then rinse off. You would be amazed at how little water you can use to get somewhat clean. We were rotated back to a rest and recreation area once for about 8 hours. We had a quick shower, ate burgers, hot dogs, barbecue chicken, and fries. The really bare-bones garden salad they had tasted like ambrosia. They even had a swimming pool. It was hilarious seeing heavily tanned arms and heads with lily-white torsos and legs. I got to take a real shower one time while out in the field. The Marine Corps has portable field shower facilities with hot water. My platoon was the last to go through, so we got a little extra time. It is called a Navy shower. You got 1 minute to get wet, then they cut the water off. Then you had a few minutes to lather up and scrub. Because we were last and they had some extra water left, we got a couple of minutes to rinse off instead of 1. That is how showers worked aboard ship, hence the term Navy shower. After several weeks without proper washing, that shower was better than sex. Story 135. Once, my pipes froze and broke for a week. When I am in the middle of a bad spiral, showering might be the only thing I get done that day. I will shower as long as there is running water. Story 136. I spent 3 days on a wild camping trip. I would go for a dip in the river but did not wash properly. Story 137. I did not shower for 8 days during a severe depression. It is strange because I normally shower every day. Story 138. It is funny that I am in the middle of a bathroom renovation and waiting for the new tub and shower installation. If the contractor ever shows up again, I will report the total number of days. Story 139. About 5 days into a 10-day backpacking trip, I felt absolutely disgusting even though I had packed deodorant. So I took a bath in a creek I found. It was bad. I took another bath in a creek before getting in my car to make sure I did not make the car smell horrible. Story 140. I was very depressed during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic and became completely reclusive for almost 2 years. I went 12 days without a shower and changed my clothes only a few times. Papa Nurgle would have been proud. I was vile. Story 141. 1 week when I was in the psychiatric ward, they would not let me shower, brush my teeth, or comb my hair. I was not even suicidal. I ended up there because someone took something I had said about my sleeping pills no longer working out of context and claimed I planned to overdose. Story 142. I was in Germany while serving in the army and spent about 2 weeks in the field with no running water, eating meals ready to eat. Story 143. I spent 2 weeks in a severe depressive episode while recovering from coronavirus disease 2019. I worked from home. It was cold, the bathroom was unheated, and showering took too much energy. I finally showered when a friend was due to come over to bring fresh cat litter because I could not carry the bag up the stairs. Story 144. When I had the flu, I could not get out of bed for 4 days. Story 145. 2 weeks, but not by choice. This was while I was serving in the army. Story 146. 32 days sailing across an ocean with a limited water supply. 4 of us, stinking in the hot, sweaty, salty boat, doing hard physical work and gutting fish. Lovely times. Story 147. The time was 3 minutes and 45 seconds. This was in the 1980s when I was a teenager taking self-contained underwater breathing apparatus lessons. I finished third. Story 148. Basic training lasted a little over a week. The showers were cold because it was winter, so they felt even colder. When we were in the field, we all smelled bad, so no one cared. Story 149. Ugh. It lasted a week because it was the middle of winter and my apartment had no heat. I was already very sick. Story 150. I am going to dive deeper into what counts as bathing. I spent 14 days on a canoe trip in the Boundary Waters and did a lot of swimming. Story 151. I lived on the street for a couple of weeks. I would bird bathe and use baby wipes often. I am grateful to be sober today. Story 152. Just now, I have been in the worst depressive episode of my life for nearly 6 days. Story 153. I have not taken a bath in months, but I try to shower every day. As other people have said, it is due to deep depression. Story 154. I last took a bath when I had swimming classes in the summer of 2022. Until today, I had only been showering. Story 155. I read this as betting. Maybe it's time I call the number. Story 156. Without bathing, probably about a decade. Without showering, it would be a much lower number. Story 157. I think it lasted a week. My dad had just died, and my mom ran off with a new boyfriend, leaving my sister and me alone in the house that used to be filled with our family. All of my time was spent in bed. I would get food and immediately return to bed to eat. It was a really rough period in my life. Story 158. I spent a few months homeless. I always carried baby wipes or used paper towels in restrooms, but finding an actual shower was difficult. Story 159. 7 to 10 days. As long as I am not leaving the house or having people over, I do not shower every day unless I feel gross. Saving money on the water bill goes a long way. Story 160. As far back as I can remember, maybe 2.5 days, I hate feeling dirty. I am sure there were times when I was a child when it lasted much longer, but I just do not remember. Story 161. About 2 weeks. Depression was awful. The smell became so bad that I had to take a shower to avoid vomiting. Story 162. 52 days. It wasn't exactly a depressive episode. I just wasn't leaving my house because I was on my computer 18 hours a day, and that covered work, socializing, and leisure. I was taking sponge baths with hand wipes for the important parts about once a week, used deodorant daily, and used a bidet. It really was not that bad. After the first bath and shower, I still smelled, though. It took me another 2 to 3 showers before I was completely clean. It was caked on dead skin and really nasty, not gonna lie. I will answer any questions people have. And no, I never smelled myself and thought you. Story 163. For 10 days, I was on a canoe trip along a river. Swimming in the river was my shower. Story 164. Almost all of the lockdown time was related to the coronavirus. Story 165. It lasted about 2 weeks, I think. It could have been longer. I was in a psychotic episode when the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic started and lost track of everything during the lockdown. Story 166. It is taking too long to build this company. Let me build an app for you. Story 167. About 2.5 months ago, I was dealing with serious health and addiction issues. Somehow I did not smell due to a complete lack of physical activity. Story 168. It was not long at all, maybe 3 full days. I was in Moldova in midwinter, staying in a house with essentially no heating, and the water was 5 degrees Celsius. I usually shower twice a day. Story 169. I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail and did not shower while crossing Oregon. It is approximately 450 miles, and I completed it in 3 weeks. I was quite ripe by the time I reached Washington because I was hiking more than 20 miles a day in August. Story 170. Earlier this year, I broke my tibia, fibula, and ankle fairly severely and did not get to shower for about 6 weeks. Being smelly was the least of my worries. Story 171. In 2012, I experienced severe depression and had a pilonidal cyst removed. Do not look it up. I lay in bed for weeks doing nothing. Story 172. I spent 28 days in the hospital. I used those moist bathing wipes, but they don't exactly make you feel clean. The first time I was allowed to take a shower, I stayed in there for about 45 minutes. It was the best shower of my entire life. Story 173. I spent almost 2 months on the Juneau Icefield Research Program, which is like a national outdoor leadership school course with a science focus. When I bathed in a bathtub rather than a shower, I drew 2 baths, but the water remained an opaque gray. Story 174. I haven't had a proper bath in years. I had a shower about a week ago while out hiking. I did jump into a lake or two during that hike, though. Story 175. We lost power for 4 days during a snowstorm. That first hot shower lasted an hour and felt heavenly. Story 176. A week camping along the Delaware River. Does skinny dipping in the river at night without soap qualify as bathing? Story 177. Do no-rinse shampoos and antibacterial extra-thick adult bath wipes count as bathing? Story 178. About a week. It's not that long in the grand scheme of things. However, I have sensory issues that make going more than a day or two between showers extremely uncomfortable, so going a week without washing is significant for me. I have only done it twice, and both times were because I was recovering from surgery, a tonsillectomy at age 19 and an operation to remove an extra bone and reattach a tendon in my foot at age 23. Story 179. 2 days for me. I have a cousin, about 12 at the time, whom we visited about 3 weeks into the summer in the early 2000s. His mother asked when he had last showered, and he said the last day of school. He thought getting in the swimming pool counted as a bath. Story 180. For 3 to 4 weeks straight, I was in the Army at Fort Polk, Louisiana, doing field training. There were no showers during that time in 2009 to 2010. If you know, you know. Story 181. Every couple of months I'd begin vomiting and spend 2 to 4 days hovering over the toilet or trying to sleep. Nothing else occurs during that time. Story 182. 5 or 6 years. My parents don't really like it when I take a bath, even though it's basically the only thing that helps when I'm having a cold. They consider it a massive waste of water and heat, so unless everyone in the family wants to bathe, it's not worth it to them. My dad never wants to take a bath. Realistically, a bath costs about €2 in water and heat, so it's kind of ridiculous. Story 183. 6 days at a wildland fire spike camp in dirt and ash with no water except drinking water in 90-degree weather in Washington state. We were helicoptered in and out. When we got back to base camp, the shower water ran black with dirt for about 5 minutes, coming from my groin area. Story 184. 3 weeks as a teenager, 13 to be exact. I was very depressed. My mom left me with my grandmother to take care of her, and I holed up in my room. It was awful. The stench took forever to air out. I am thankful I made it through. Story 185. I spent about a week pony trekking through the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. It was fragrant and a bit itchy. Story 186. When I had coronavirus disease 2019 a couple of years ago, it hit me hard. It was not bad enough to require hospitalization, but I was essentially bedridden for about 10 days. I changed my clothes a couple of times but did not bathe during that period. Story 187. I was on a 14-day backpacking trip along a gorgeous alpine river, so I got some rinsing. When we got into the van, we discovered how bad we smelled. Story 188. During California's severe drought, I only showered for work. I did not shower on weekends. Story 189. I do not think I have ever gone more than 4 days without showering. I have struggled with major depressive disorder for over a decade, so there might be some longer times I do not remember. Story 190. It was about a week and a half in the Army during a field training exercise. I could literally scrape the film off my skin. There was chafing and pimples everywhere. A shower had never felt so good, and I had never smelled so bad. Story 191. 17 days after I was diagnosed with leukemia, My immune system was completely shut down and I developed severe infections. The doctors did not want to disconnect any of my intravenous lines, so they only used wipes until the antibiotics treated the infection and I became more stable. Story 192. 15 days, but only because I was on a deep country backpacking, rappelling, and climbing trip with Outward Bound in the Sierra Nevada. We took random bird baths in small bodies of water we found. We used no trails and learned to read contour maps. I was sure I had a pleasant aroma, rich with the smell of Mother Earth. In the day-to-day world, about 5 days. I even wore the same clothes during that period, changing only underwear and socks. Story 193. Since puberty? For days. Camping where there is no running water. Story 194. My entire family and I had the swine flu for 2 to 3 weeks. We were all bedridden and could hardly move. It was awful. Story 195. More than once over 2 weeks. Depression is a bitch. Not recently, though. I am better now, kind of. Story 196. Buddy, I was a World of Warcraft addict through high school. I'd go 3 weeks at a time without seeing daylight. Story 197. I spent 17 days in a major depressive episode. I was working remotely and had gone no contact with everyone I knew. I shaved my head as an experiment to see how long it would take to develop body odor. It took 14 days before I could faintly smell my armpits. During that time, my skin cleared completely. My eczema did not flare up, I did not itch, and I did not have an odor. I only started to smell a few days before my menstrual period. Story 198. 17 days earlier, I had undergone 2 major surgeries: medial patellofemoral ligament reconstruction and a femoral osteotomy, where the femur is cut and rotated. I was cleared to shower immediately, but I barely felt well enough to get out of bed, let alone try to shower. 6 days after the surgery, I felt okay enough to give it a shot. We had a shower chair because I could not put any weight on my right leg, and when I tried to sit down, the chair slipped out from under me and both of my legs hit the ground. It was extremely painful. An emergency appointment with my surgeon's physician assistant, a delay in physical therapy, and some x-rays later, and the only reason I did not damage the osteotomy was that they had used 7 screws in my femur and hip. It took me another 11 days to get the courage to try again. Falling like that made me terrified to get back in the shower. I am someone who showers daily, and that was probably the 3rd worst aspect of the surgery. It was 8 weeks postoperative before I could start daily showering again. I am about 4 months postoperative and I am facing the prospect of needing the same 2 surgeries on my other leg. The only 2 things I dread more are the pain management, which was a literal 10 out of 10 for the first week in both my hip and knee even with opioids, and the physical therapy. The only thing that kept me sane was my fantastic partner helping me clean myself in bed. I would have gone insane otherwise. Story 199. Back in my 20s, when I was at the worst point in my depression, I went 3 weeks without a shower. Story 200. I was stranded for 3 days. I did not have a change of clothes, and even if I had, I would not have showered at the house of strangers. Story 201. There was an immigrant woman with a work visa who told the other women she only showered once a week. It did not stop her male coworkers from hooking up with her. I discreetly asked one of the men who did, and he said it was not bad. Story 202. I think it was about 5 days. I was so broke I could not even buy body soap or go anywhere. Story 203. 1 week during summer break. I played Minecraft so much that I didn't shower. Story 204. I was in 8th or 9th grade during summer break and spent 1 week playing World of Warcraft. Story 205. I spent 4 weeks on a field training exercise while I was in the army. We were in the middle of the desert near El Paso, sleeping under canopies with no floor. Most of us did not take our boots off while sleeping because of the sand and the massive tarantulas. At one point, I had not taken my boots off for a week straight. Do not try to imagine the smell. Story 206. For 25 years, I have showered daily or twice a day. I cannot remember the last time I skipped a shower since my car accident in 1997, when I was in intensive care for 5 days and could not shower. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.